Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change. Time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome back, Patriots, to another edition of the Raising Cain Show. We're going to have a great show for you guys today. I've got a great guest who's coming back on the show. I had him on, quite some time ago, but he is a fellow Patriot and friend, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Miller, and we're going to be getting into a whole lot of stuff about his career and kind of what happened during the Biden administration and the COVID mandates, and kind of where he's at now and what's going on today. So this is going to be a great show, but stick with us. We'll be right back after a commercial break. I'm going to get these out of the way so that way we have an uninterrupted time of, just sharing back and forth our thoughts and what's going on. We'll be right back after a quick message.
Heard of Q Broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q Broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
Since 2017, 150,000 farms have shut down, and working farmland has been reduced by 21 million acres. The system has been crippling the remaining farmers, forcing some to adopt nefarious farming techniques, by pumping hormones and other performance-enhancing drugs into their cows so they can survive in crammed feedlots. Or the farmers are forced to jump ship and sell to land-hoarding, profit-chasing agricultural oligarchies, who use their billions of dollars to crush the competition and increase your family's dependence on their manufactured food. What could possibly go wrong? The family farm will soon be a thing of the past, unless you do something. You can. That's why there's From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that connects consumers directly with local farmers, which means you can buy fresh, non-factory farm food, and you'll know exactly where your food came from and how it was raised. For the first time in nearly 100 years, independent farms will have a way to not only survive, but thrive. From the Farm was founded by A.J. Richards, an active homesteader, and Brooke Entz, a CrossFit Games athlete, and an Amazonian warrior in the movies Wonder Woman and Justice League. She clearly has a passion for healthy food and a healthy lifestyle. And since both AJ and Brooke come from generations of ranchers and farmers, they know what they're talking about. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. Today, we're honored to sit down with former Lieutenant Colonel Brad Miller, a man whose courage and convictions speak volumes. A West Point graduate and decorated Army officer, Brad served for nearly 2 decades across multiple theaters and leadership roles. But when faced with the military's COVID-19 shot mandate, he stood firm in his beliefs, a decision that ultimately led to his resignation from the Army in 2022. We're going to talk about the military's COVID mandate, the current state of reinstatement policies for those affected, and his perspective on where our armed forces are today. This is a conversation about courage, leadership, and the price of standing for your values. Brad, thank you so much for joining the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to getting into this topic.
So, it's been a while since you were on the show last time. And of course, a lot has happened, but there might be some people that are, listening to the show today that are unfamiliar with your story. So can you share briefly what led to your decision to refuse the COVID-19 mandate and ultimately resign?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in North Carolina. I live in Tennessee now. I state that because just to give people a little bit of background on me before I even entered the military. So I grew up in a small town kind of in the middle of North Carolina in a patriotic town amongst a lot of patriotic people. I would say most people in my hometown when I was growing up probably went to church on Sunday, considered themselves kind of, red-blooded Americans, a patriotic town. So I finished high school. I go to West Point and go into the Army. I entered the Army in 2003. That's when I graduated from West Point. So this is right as kind of the global war on terror is kicking off, right? So in fact, as I would have graduated West Point, we would have just kind of entered into Iraq just a couple of months prior. So that's kind of the environment that I entered the military in. And as you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, so I spent nearly 2 decades in the military. So it was actually 19 years and some change. And at the time that the mandate went into effect, so the COVID shot mandate, which was in the summer of 2021, I was a battalion commander in the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. I had just entered battalion command, and about 2.5 months after I entered command, the mandate went into effect. This was not a shock to anybody. In fact, I had already made my superiors aware of the fact that I had not taken the shot up to that point, and that I was not going to take it, come what may. Because I just felt like the writing was on the wall and that it was just a matter of time before the mandate would go into effect. So it did go into effect August 24th of 2021. And, again, I'd already told my superiors, hey, I'm not taking the shot. And then once the mandate went into effect, I did reiterate to my direct boss, who was the brigade commander. I was one of his battalion commanders, that, hey, I'm not going to take this shot. And long story short, about 2 months later, I was relieved of command. So that happened towards the end of October of 2021. A couple of months later, once I realized that, hey, the military is not going to walk this back, despite the fact that it was clearly unlawful. And I would say, I also very much believed at the time in 2021 that this was part of some larger deliberate attack on the United States by whomever, by elements within our own government, foreign elements, whatever, a mixture of the two, whatever. But even 4 years ago, probably even 5 years ago, a couple of months into the whole, COVID phenomenon, back in 2020, I very much believed, okay, we're not being told the truth about this. Something's going on. This
Absolutely.
is clearly, this is treasonous. You know,
when
it's
when
more,
when you looked at it, for me, it was not hard to figure out. Obviously, I wasn't in the military at the time that this went on, but I had been in the Army during the forced vaccination program with the anthrax vaccine. I got sent to Korea. Basically got told I needed to take this experimental vaccine. I said no. They said, well, then you will be kicked out with a dishonorable discharge. So I said, all right, well, I guess I'm going to have to get it. And because I didn't want to be, basically have like a felony on my record. So I got it. And a whole bunch of soldiers that were, overseas, and many of them in Iraq, that did that ended up getting Gulf War syndrome and a whole bunch of other things. And to this day, we still don't know fully, what the impacts were of that. But one thing that came out of all of that for sure was that it was illegal, that you cannot force soldiers to take an experimental vaccine. That is basically, making them do something without informed consent.
right.
And because you join the military doesn't mean that you become the guinea pig for the US government. And that's one of the things that came out of that. So it was so clearly unlawful to me when I saw it. And I saw the writing on the wall. The moment that Biden took office, I knew they were going to mandate it. And I was working at the time as a contractor, and they said, you're going to have to get this vaccine, or you're going to have to, find another job. And I said, well, I'm out of here. By then, I'd learned my lesson the first time around, and I said, I'm not doing this. And the other thing that was a big red flag to me was you had the media, you had the social media companies, you had the of course the government, the hospitals, the drug companies, all lockstep, arm in arm, singing Kumbaya. We are the world, we are the people. And I was just like, whoa, hold on a minute, this is something is off here. There's no way all these people are in agreement. And then anybody who tried to say anything that was against the narrative got their accounts immediately,
Sure.
squashed, got canceled. And that's what told me that we were in some sort of, psyop, massive psyop going on to basically, try to see how far they could push violating our rights, those very rights that you and I swore an oath to defend. So yeah, I can't agree with you more. That was I still to this day, I sometimes think back and I go, how in the world did this even happen? Like in America, of all places. Sure, I expect to see that kind of thing in Europe, not here.
Yeah, I ask myself that exact same question. Yeah, so you mentioned Korea and the anthrax shot. So I was actually in Korea. That's where I was stationed at the time. So in 2020, I was in Korea. So this is kind of when we first started to hear the narrative about, this supposed COVID phenomenon. And I just remember immediately thinking, and this is in the early months of 2020, that, hey, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I know we're not being told the truth. So then in the summer of 2020, I returned to the States. I was still very much questioning the narrative. And then the talk started moving towards, warp speed, the production of these so-called vaccines. And I just remember thinking, even in late 2020, because I think they came out maybe in mid-December of 2020, the first shots. And I just remember thinking, okay, that's at least one of the objectives of this, COVID operation. Because I very much believe that it was an op designed to weaken the United States, though it was also a worldwide op. But I just remember thinking, yeah, you can't take this shot. So then fast forward into 2021, I take command, and I know that it's one, I don't want to take the shot because I do believe that these are going to put people's health at risk. Now, obviously, we now know that for sure, incontrovertibly. But also, I would say an even greater reason is I'm not participating in this op. Yes, the military is participating in it. Yes, there are elements within the government that are participating in it. I do believe that there are people who are engaging in treasonous activity, but I'm not going to participate in this. And if that means that I have to walk away from the military, and I know that that may seem paradoxical, because in a way it's like saying, in order for me to fulfill the oath to support and defend the Constitution that I have taken, I'm going to actually have to take off the uniform. So I could appreciate the seeming paradox there, but that was the situation that I felt like I was in. And there are plenty of other people who also felt like they were in a similar situation. And so my decision that I made was ultimately to take off the uniform and resigned, and I ended up leaving with about 19 years and 3 months of active service under my belt.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's almost retirement right there. So there was something that never gets talked about. And I'm glad that you brought up that you felt like this was like an attack to weaken our country and our military. There was something that went on that I don't ever hear anybody talking about, but my son had joined the military in 2019, had gone through basic, was in AIT as COVID hit and crazy stuff started happening. One, they weren't feeding our soldiers because they were making them stand 6 feet apart to go into the chow hall or the mess hall, and they didn't have enough people working on base to support all the troops, and so they were sending them home without meals. And then they were having quizzes and competitions in the in the quad, basically, to see who would win an MRE, and it was just so absolutely absurd, and so I actually contacted my representative and said, hey, this kind of crap is going on. My son is not getting fed. There are soldiers not getting fed on base right now. And next thing you know, all of a sudden, things got squared away very quickly there. But one of the things I was looking into things, because my son came home around Christmas time in 2019, and he was just so sick, and just like all of the signs of COVID, before they were saying that COVID had hit here. And he was telling me everybody in his unit was sick. He came home and literally everybody in the household got sick within like a couple of days. I mean, it was the most virulent thing I've ever seen. And what's interesting is when you look at what we know now, it appears that, of course, that COVID was leaked, out of this biological lab in Wuhan around October, early October. Well, something happened also around that same time, and that was the 7th CISM World Military Games that were held in Wuhan, China, from October 18th to October 27th, and literally the militaries from all the countries around the world were there, including U.S. And I believe that was like the first spread, of that back to our militaries. And because everything that I'm seeing is that there was a massive, infection that was going around all over the military bases, anywhere that, that it was able to spread. And I think my son ultimately brought it home to us, on Christmas time. So it's kind of interesting, I do think that there's some evidence. Obviously, there's a whole lot of stuff that's come out now. They were doing all of these, exercises, the World Health Organization, in the UN, and literally the exercises were about a COVID-like virus, escaping. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And, and I do realize that there's all kinds of conspiracy theories and everything, but it's not a conspiracy theory. It's an actual conspiracy fact that this thing did come from a lab, and that the U.S. was funding some of the research on, the gain of function on this, and that there were patents on, on these viruses, on some of these viruses, the genetics of the virus that was patented by U.S. military. So it's really weird. And I would like to eventually see some answers on this. I don't know if we will, because to be honest with you, I mean, look how long it took for us just to be able to see answers on, JFK, and I know that top secret stuff's supposed to get declassified after 10 years. But, here we are, even, way over 50 years later, and they still haven't released, they still haven't unredacted everything. So kind of interesting.
Yeah. Using the analogy of the JFK assassination is interesting, because when we look at that, and then we look at, the term that everyone likes to use now is the deep state. So if we look at how widespread, how wide-reaching the tentacles of the deep state are, we realize just how much power and influence they have within a lot of the halls of government. But it also it extends beyond just government, because it also extends into a lot of these large corporations that also have a lot of influence within our government.
Yep.
and other institutions as well, that at some point we kind of have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? Because it does go beyond just this COVID operation that you and I have been talking about, because you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and I have the same thought all the time. How did we get here? Because at some point we have to ask ourselves, how was this, COVID style operation? How was it even possible? When we like to think that we in the United States are citizens of a nation that abides by the rule of law. So how come we saw ourselves very rapidly in a situation in which all of that deteriorated? We watched the media become entirely weaponized against the people. We watched many of the organs of federal government also become weaponized against the people. But we also saw that at the state level in many of the states. So it's kind of like, well, what
Including
happened
my
to
own of
weaken
West
our
Virginia.
institutions?
Yeah. It's interesting. While I'm encouraged by some things that I'm seeing, for example, the FBI, of course, my history with the FBI as a federal whistleblower. I am encouraged by some changes that I see, right? I see them going after real criminals now. I see them actually bringing to justice a lot of people that are tied to, MS-13 and various gangs that have, basically plagued our country. And they are clearly moving back to a direction of focusing on public safety threats, which I think is a good thing. But the thing that begs the question and that stays in the back of my mind all the time is you had 287,000 illegal uses of, Section 702 of FISA to spy on American citizens illegally without warrants, to look into their digital data. This is not Nate Cain saying this. This is a federal judge saying this. And yet there's not been a single prosecution of an FBI agent or leadership for misusing that. And then Congress, when they had the opportunity to repeal it, they kicked the can down the road and allow it to continue. You've got already, it's been adjudicated that Lloyd Austin committed a crime. He did not have the authority, to enact, emergency use authorization without the president signing off on that at the time. And yet he did. Why hasn't he been charged with a crime for violating the rights, of American citizens, of soldiers? So what I don't see is I don't see justice for the crimes that were committed, in the previous administration. I don't see justice. And when I don't see justice, I have to believe there's a reason, and that it's not just about, well, it would be hard to prosecute or whatever. No, I think that there's more going on. I do think that that there are still elements of the deep state or the administrative state or the shadow government, whatever you want to call it, that are still in existence today, in place. And on that note, I have talked to a number of FBI whistleblowers who have been offered their jobs back. And I'll be honest with you, I was like, oh man, this is great news. And I reached out to a couple of them that are friends of mine. And I was like, hey, man, congratulations. God bless you. I'm so glad that you're being offered a job back. And their response was not what I was expecting. They said, yeah, right. Yeah, we'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. And, they were basically very kind of negative towards the idea, because they said that basically the people who were involved in, persecuting them were still there. Nobody was punished for, the essentially the abuse of power and the retribution that was brought on them for doing the right thing. And I'm hearing similar things from people in the military as well. So I'm curious from your perspective. I think when I was looking it up, there was only, like, as of June, and I don't know what the numbers are now, but there were only 13 soldiers that actually had gone back. 13.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure that number is accurate. So there are people that I know who've been tracking these numbers more closely than I have, and they have said that, hey, that number 13 was not accurate. The military knows that wasn't accurate. they have been misrepresenting the numbers of people that have come back.
Wow.
So I think that number is actually closer to 2 or maybe 3.
Wow.
So now we are, we're in October. We're in the middle of October, right? So we're 9 months into this administration, and we have had 2, maybe 3, or even if it is 13 people that have decided to come back. So, and it's weird because when you mentioned some of your friends who are in the FBI and how you contacted them and said, "Hey, congratulations, I heard you're getting your job back," and then their reaction back to you, it reminds me of on January 20th in the afternoon while Trump's inauguration speech was occurring. I wasn't watching the speech, and I just remember my phone started blowing up. And I was like, what is going on? I'm getting all these texts and Facebook messages and stuff like that. What is going on? And all these people are saying congratulations. And immediately I was like, Trump must have said something in his speech. And of course, what he had said in his speech was, hey, we're gonna reinstate all these individuals who lost their careers because of the COVID shot mandate. And people who know me, they know my story, immediately started pinging me and my phone starts blowing up. Well, here we are 9 months later, and that has not happened. So Trump's speech was followed up 1 week later with a memo basically saying the same thing. That then was followed up by a series of memos that have come out on several different occasions by members of the Department of Defense, now Department of War. And they have been slow rolling this process. And yet I will say at some point, I believe it was in April, towards the end of April, Hegseth did put out a video that he released on Twitter or X in which he did refer to the mandate as unlawful. And that was the first time that anyone in government had said that, right? Had acknowledged that the mandate as implemented was unlawful. Now, here's where it gets curious. So I think it was April 23rd. He puts out that little video. It's a couple of minutes long, maybe 3 minutes long. And the way in which he says it was very strange. I personally did not like it. I will say, hey, at least he called it unlawful. It's about time. But he said it as, we all know that the previous administration's mandate was unlawful. You know it. We know it. That's the way he said it. And if that's not an exact quote, it's very, very close. And I just remember thinking, well, hold on a second. If we all know this, how come, since this administration has been in place and since you've been the Secretary of Defense, now War, your department has put out a series of memos and you have yet to call it unlawful until now. But that same day, several hours later, he put out a new memo and it did not have the word unlawful in it. 2 more weeks pass because people started calling him out for this memo. They said, hey, you'll say this in a video verbally, but then the same day, several hours later, you will release a memo. You had the opportunity to put it in writing and you didn't. What's going on? So 2 weeks later, I believe on May 7th, he finally put the word unlawful into a memo. So, let's give credit where credit is due. Hegseth now has, both verbally and in writing, acknowledged that the COVID shot mandate was unlawful as implemented, something that people like you and me and many of the other signatories of the Declaration of Military Accountability and plenty of other people have been saying for years now. We've been saying for years that this was unlawful. And you rightly said a couple of minutes ago that, hey, we can go back and look at what happened, 2 decades ago with the whole anthrax debacle, where it was later adjudicated as being unlawful.
That's right. That's right. And that's, to me, that's the crux of it all, is that this isn't like, an oopsie, we made a mistake. No, we already knew. There was already Army regulation in place to not allow for this to happen, and yet it happened. And that is where people don't understand, who are not familiar with military regulation. They may not understand that we already went through this. It was already adjudicated. There was already Army regulation. So therefore, everybody in the chain of command who followed this unlawful order, they're responsible. They have a level of responsibility. Now, maybe the punishment shouldn't be the same for everybody, but certainly those on the leadership and the top, absolutely, they should have been punished. There should be, as far as I'm concerned, there should have been court-martials. And we've not.
I agree. I agree. Because here's what I would say about that. And I've been saying this for, several years now, as have you, plenty of other people. I'm not saying I'm unique here, but But if you look at our Declaration of Military Accountability that has been out now for almost 2 years, of course, we released that on January 1st, 2024. We're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah.
And I would say that the military accountability, this effort had been ongoing for quite a while before January 1st of 2024, right? So there were people who'd been calling for accountability, and here we are 4 years after the mandate was implemented, and we have had zero accountability. In fact, what we have seen is a lot of people, potentially as many as 100,000, have lost their careers. Maybe a dozen have made it back in, right? And also we have seen that the individuals who follow these orders, but also pushed these unlawful orders, many of them have been promoted. None have been held accountable. And I'm like you, because I think we can extend a lot of grace here, because you and I both know there was an enormous amount of obfuscation of the truth in a way that I think we've never seen in this country before. So I understand everyone was being lied to. But here's the thing. There is a lot more clarity in the fall of 2025 than there was in the late summer or the fall of 2021. So if you were a colonel, if you were a general, or an admiral, right? And let's say that you were duped 4 years ago, I can extend some grace and I can say, well, you know what? You certainly weren't exhibiting any strategic thinking ability. You certainly weren't doing what we pay you to do. Your 30 plus years of experience that you may have had, we expect you to understand the strategic environment. We expect you to look at and identify the threats to readiness, the threats to our country. You didn't do that.
Yeah, you demonstrated poor judgment.
You demonstrated poor judgment, strategic thinking ability. Absolutely. However, that's not necessarily criminal. I would say it may very well disqualify you for your job at that level, but it's not criminal. But that's 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or a year ago, or now. At what point was it impossible to ignore all the evidence, all the red flags,
and how about
all the
now?
questions?
I mean, look, do I think that Trump was duped? Absolutely. Do I think that Operation Warp Speed was well-intentioned but was a horrible idea? Yes. And so I have grace for him in that regard. But what bothers me to this day is the fact that I walked into Walmart the other day, and there, right out there, was a table saying, come get your COVID vaccine for free. And there's been tons of evidence now in multiple studies, international studies that have been done that show the damage that these so-called, and I say so-called because they're not vaccines, they are gene editing, shots is what they are. And the fact is there's a ton of evidence that these do not prevent the spread of COVID, that they do not do anything, to prevent, harm to others. In fact, if anything, they cause, the body to start producing, massive amounts, viral load of the spike protein, which does shed. That's all evidenced now. And so the fact is that we know that as particular young people, including those that are in the best health and shape of their life, a lot of them in the military, that they have a very high risk of cardiovascular problems due to these things. So, and we still don't, there's so much that we don't know yet that, that there's a lot of evidence pointing to at problems with fertility and things like that. The fact that the female ovary is the most susceptible to storing of this, spike protein. So there's a lot of things right now that, to me, how this thing has not been pulled off the shelves and why this thing is still being, given to our troops. I mean, look, fine. If you want to make it available for free citizens that feel they're at risk and they want to take a chance, look, I am all about liberty. And if somebody wants to, take that chance, fine, go for it. But the fact that soldiers are in the unique position of having to do what they're told or being, largely coerced, whether you want to, whether we want to admit it or not, the fact is, when you got a chain of command telling you, hey, I want you to go get your, vaccines, or you got military doctors saying, hey, have you had your shots? Have you had your vaccines? The fact is it's ingrained in you especially when you're an enlisted soldier or you're a lower level, to not really, question that, but to just say it. And I still think to this day, there are still issues of a lack of transparency. We still don't have soldiers being told what is in these things. We still don't have soldiers being told what the risks are. And so, as far as I'm concerned, our military is still susceptible, to being basically, coerced into a situation, where they are taking something without informed consent. And
Yeah,
I'm
I
very
agree.
concerned about
Yes.
that,
Yes. You're
because
exactly right.
I think it leads to the degradation of the health of our military.
Yeah. Is if we want to look at it from a pure kind of like a purist liberty perspective, hey, if you want to take the COVID shot, should you be allowed to take it? Well, if we're going to look at it that way, we should at least be saying, but if you're going to take it, you should at least do so with full informed
That's right.
consent, understanding exactly what you're taking, so that
Yep,
you
sign this right
personally
here.
can make the analysis.
Yeah, and in fact, I believe that we should get to the point where, look, I'm all for, I wouldn't call myself a libertarian politically, but I'm definitely a libertarian kind of ideologically, right? I'm a Republican because at the end of the day, I don't believe that being a third party is beneficial to me in elections. But when it comes to my political philosophy, it is that of what our founders believed in, which is that we should maximize liberty. But
Mhm.
with that meaning, with that, where the government, I do believe, has a role in protecting us, is they should be ensuring that we are being given informed consent. And
Yeah.
the problem we have right now is because of the way the laws are, and I can't remember the name of it, but I think is it the SAFE Act that basically allows drug companies to produce vaccines and be free from any kind of lawsuit. That is complete bullcrap. What they should do is, if there's a risk, then list that risk, put it on there, and make people read it. And if they sign it after reading it and they say, hey, I still want this, then it's on them, and then they can't sue. But we
Yeah.
have to be able to be made aware of this. And the
Yeah,
fact
so-
is that we had propaganda being pushed by our own government and by
Sure.
the media in conjunction with the government. That is a
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah, you're bringing up a good point, particularly when you look at the founding fathers and kind of these ideals or these principles that our country has been constructed upon. And we mentioned the rule of law a little bit ago, but also, I would say that there's this very important relationship that exists between truth and freedom. And you kind of can't have freedom without truth. And so when you live in a society, and you just mentioned propaganda, if we live in a society where it becomes very difficult to understand what the truth is, where the truth can be found, how to arrive at the truth, etc., and who's telling you the truth or not, then that's a society in which it's going to be very hard to remain free. And we saw that the last couple of years ago. So I think here's where I think it takes us in terms of the military right now. Because people say to me, hey, how come you're not going back? Are you going to go back? How come you're not going back? Cut your hair, shave your beard, get back. The military needs you. And I haven't even seriously considered going back into the military. And here's why. I was 8.5 months away from qualifying for my retirement pension. Why would I not go back for, a year and at
You're
least
right, get your pension.
Yeah. So why wouldn't I do that? But it all boils down to this. All the problems over which I resigned are still there, and they have not been resolved. And in fact, I would say they've barely even been addressed. So what has been addressed in the military, according to, Brad Miller's opinion? Because here's what I would say. I would say there were 3 major problems that the military was facing. Plenty of other smaller problems, but let's look at the 3 that were very, very apparent and in our faces, right? So one, and I would say the biggest, like by far the most significant, because I do think it involved treason and many other crimes, and that was the COVID operation to include the shot mandate, right? Number 1.
Yeah.
The second, all the DEI initiatives.
Yeah.
And then third, this botched Afghanistan withdrawal. So
Oh my
those
God,
are
yeah.
these 3 huge problems, all of which are relatively recent. These aren't long-standing problems that have been there forever. These are problems that we saw just within the last couple of years, right? Now, and I would say that for all three of those, you could really look at this through a lens of accountability too. We tend to talk about accountability with respect to the COVID shot mandate, and then maybe secondarily to the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, which also has seen zero accountability. And then maybe a little bit also with the DEI initiatives. And if there's been any accountability at all,
how about like turning our military into a social experiment? I mean, who the hell thought that was a good idea?
Right.
I mean, I really even leftists, in the past saw that the military was kind of off limits for a lot of that crap. Like, there are standards for a reason. I mean, if you were somebody who, was blinded, for example, you were automatically chaptered out because you couldn't do your job. If you had severe mental illness, you were chaptered out because you were not nobody wanted to be on the battlefield and in the midst of a combat situation and have you break down, and so how we, for example, started allowing, people with gender dysphoria and things like that into the military, where they were going to need constant, regardless of whether people have the right to do that on their own as civilians, I'm all for it. Hey, look, if you want to do it, go do it. That you're an American citizen, you have freedom as an adult to do what you want. I advise against it, but hey, that's your choice. But the military shouldn't be on the hook to pay for people's bad decisions. And that's where I was like just shocked that we went down that road, because I saw immediately the impact of that and the shift that began happening within the military in terms of like morale. And now that's one of the big things that we've seen, is that there has been some correction in that area, right? And so now all of a sudden, recruitment numbers are up. We're actually able to get people to join the military again, which we couldn't get, for a while there.
Yeah. So this is where I would say the military has done some good things. So I think they have rightly gone after the DEI issue. I don't think there's any evidence you could ever find whatsoever that says that a DEI military is a stronger military. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Everyone who's being intellectually honest knows that. So in that regard, there are a lot of things that the department has done to get rid of that. I think those things are good. I applaud that. But I also think that's low-hanging fruit compared to the COVID shot mandate, which we have seen, I would say, and there are people who are maybe going to be surprised at this, but I would say a lot of what the department has done there is smoke and mirrors. And so I think the department has tried to they've misrepresented what they've actually been doing when it comes to the reinstatement process, which is why we've only seen a handful of people actually return out of 100,000 that we know lost their careers. And I think that go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that action of, hey, we're going to bring these guys back is the same thing as, hey, we're going to bring a bunch of these FBI whistleblowers back, because the idea is we need to get some positive media attention, to kind of restore, the military's, image. I think it's more about image control than it is about actually fixing anything. And I'm just being honest. I think that's what happened both in the FBI and I understand it. I get it. If I was Pete Hegseth and, or Kash Patel, I'd probably would see the value of doing that same thing, even if you couldn't actually change anything, at least of trying to change the image that had been so badly damaged.
Yeah. I mean, there is certainly something to be said for optics management. I get it. I get it. You do, when you have a department like that and the reputation of that department has been severely tarnished, that's significant. You have to repair that image. I think the problem comes in when you're instead of kind of showcasing the good things that you're doing, which I think is legitimate. That's fair. We all understand that. But I think when you start obfuscating some of what you're doing, or you start misrepresenting what you're doing, that's when optics management is now becoming now we're crossing a line.
It's just crossing the line of optics management to propaganda. And
exactly.
And so, like, I'll give you an example of something that, to me, I will never be satisfied that our military has made, the correct changes until until they've at least, at a minimum, made public the numbers of our soldiers that developed adverse reaction to the vaccine.
Right.
That needs to become public, and there should be, as far as I'm concerned, there should be congressional hearings on it. Just like, and that shouldn't just extend to the military; it should extend to the entire, to the entire vaccine program as a whole. Do I expect that to happen under Trump? No, because he was largely responsible for, Operation Warp Speed. But I will hope and pray that at least in the next administration, that there will be some consideration for making public what actually the results of that was. Because I think if we don't do that, we are plagued to make that same mistake again.
Sure. Here's the situation. Here's where we find ourselves, those of us who consider ourselves to be, conservatives, conservative Christians, so I have many friends that, and I'm sure, many people like this too, and they'll tell you, hey, I'm a Trump fan. I voted for Trump 3 times. We hear a lot of people say that. Right. And so I think it's important that people say, hey, listen, our loyalty has to be to the truth. It has to be to the Constitution. Of course, it has to be to God first and foremost. Right. And so that means that we can't be selective in our alignment with the truth or with the Constitution, et cetera. And so now I think it's time to say, hey, let's not allow this administration to fall into the same type of errors that previous administrations have committed, because if we do that, then we're not actually correcting things. So what I want to make sure that we don't do as citizens is, let's not allow small victories, which are important. I'm not saying those are bad, those are good, but let's not allow small victories to lead us into thinking that it's okay that some of these bigger issues have not been tackled.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize too, that you can think that Trump is doing a great job on certain things and on most things, but still think that he's not doing a great job on, one particular issue or another. And I think, the transparency over COVID, I think, is still one of those areas where I think, honestly, I think our media has failed us. I think because they were part of the problem, right? So they were all on board with pushing the mandate. And so they don't want to, so we have this conundrum, right? In that was it the Fourth Estate or whatever, which was supposed to protect the American citizens and supposed to, challenge the government about things. Well, they buddied up with and partnered with, with the government to promote, the mandate. And so now they're just as much culpable as, as the previous administration and even the Trump administration for that part. They hated Trump until Biden got in there. And so they were distrustful of Operation Warp. It's funny. You could go back and look. They were distrustful of Operation Warp Speed. Then when Biden took over, they were like, oh, hey, everybody needs to go get this shot because Biden said so. It just goes to show, folks, that you cannot make your decisions. You cannot evaluate something on the basis of politics. You got to separate yourself from that and approach it with critical thinking, because the media is going to lie to you every time. They're going to tell you, all you got to do is look at who funds the media. It's largely the drug companies. And, they made a ton of money. And in fact, it's interesting. Another thing that was shocking to me, I just was kind of curious because I noticed that Bill Gates and George Soros had partnered up to buy the PCA test. And, or basically the test that they were using for testing for COVID that was all over. So I was curious. I was like, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, people know that Bill Gates had some ownership in Moderna, but he sold most of that and ended up, going into this joint venture with George Soros. So I started looking at, follow the money, right? So I'm like, interesting. How much money did the U.S. government spend on testing versus how much money did the U.S. government spend on vaccines? Which would you, kind of initially think there was more money spent on? I would think the vaccines, but that's not the case. It was a lot more money spent on actually testing. So all those policies that went into play that said, oh, if you want to go back to work, you got to go get tested. Oh, you got to sniffle, you got to go get tested. All of that kind of stuff. Believe me, there were lobbyists that were pushing for that kind of stuff, pushing to get those policies put into place in the government so that they could make money. And I do believe profit was a motivation for a lot of the decisions. I don't always think that it's just like, some evil, dark conspiracy of, nefarious thing of, oh, hey, we want to kill off, half the population, although that, who knows, that very well could have been one. But it's very easy to show that they had a profit motive to push for the types of policies that they did. You want to go back to work, you got to go get tested. You want to go visit somebody in the hospital, you got to get tested. You go to the doctor's office and you have a sniffle, you got to get tested. The amount of money that the federal government spent on just testing alone was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
all of the money.
Yeah, and I am one of those that tends to think that it goes beyond money and that there are other sinister agendas. And I'll tell you another thing too.
I think so too. I just don't. Don't until I can prove it. I don't necessarily throw that out. I do start with the low hanging fruit.
Sure.
Pull all that first, and then try to go down that road as more information becomes available. I mean, like, we're finding out now just how much we knew and how early we knew it.
Right.
And like, I don't understand. Who was the lady who was the head of the CDC? Walensky?
Yeah, Rochelle Walensky. Yeah.
Yes. That woman should be in prison for mass murder, because one of the things that came out, and she left, and but it came out after she left that she was given all of, I think it was Moderna or Pfizer's data. I think it was Pfizer. And their data showed that women who were pregnant, who took the vaccine, that it was harmful to the fetus and actually increased, like by an exponential number, the chances of a stillbirth or a spontaneous abortion. Mm-hmm. It showed that to be the case, that it was extremely high risk. And not only that, but this is Pfizer's own internal data showed that mothers breastfeeding, that it would pass through the spike protein would pass through the mother's milk and was causing all kinds of digestive problems for infants, and that it was able to pass through the placental blood barrier, and was actually, they were finding when they were doing autopsies of fetuses, they would see that the brains of these fetuses was full of spike protein. How in the world? She knew all this 5 days before she came out and publicly said, this is safe and effective for pregnant women to take, and nursing mothers, and I think you should all take it. She should be in prison.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of blame to go around on this, and not just in the military, but all throughout the government. And and until I see people being indicted and brought to justice for what they knew, and what they lied to the American people about, I'm not going to be satisfied. I never will.
Yeah. And that's where, a lot of people ask me, what's my opinion on people rejoining the military right now? And I have not seriously considered going back. I feel like the most severe problems over which I resigned have not been resolved or even adequately addressed. So that's kind of my decision. Of course, people are free to make their own decisions. I would not personally recommend others to join the military right now. In fact, what I would say is I would rather we keep the pressure on the administration and the military so that they can continue to make the true improvements necessary, and enforce true accountability to then make the military a much better environment for people to join.
Yeah.
But I understand, there are people who still think that is the way to serve their country. And I get it. You and I both served. We understand that thought. There are a lot of great Americans out there that they think things are getting better, and maybe in some sense they are. But I do think that we've got to keep the pressure on as citizens. When you live in a republic, that means you have a lot of responsibilities on your own shoulders to ensure that your government abides by the rule of law. In our case, abides by the Constitution. It's our job as citizens to make sure that happens.
You bring up a very good point, and I want to kind of explore this with you for a minute. I've thought about this a lot in my life. I have a lot of friends that are veterans. I was never a combat veteran. Let me make that clear. I was a basically information systems. I was an IT geek, And I did serve, a tour of duty in Korea, and that's about as close to the action as I ever got, and in being in a lot of exercises and things like that. But there is a camaraderie that is there that I share with my fellow veterans, and there is a love for my fellow veterans that does supersede it's weird. I don't even know. It's like a brotherhood. And you feel it when when I talk to a guy that was like, served in Vietnam, or, served in the Korean War, and there's like a connection there, because you both went through some shit, and you both gave up some rights for a while, to serve this country. And so I have a very mixed feeling inside of me that that goes on. Part of me is extremely proud of my service to my country. But like you said, part of me is like, I would never want my kids, in the military in the way that it is right now, without them fixing some problems. And but I also understand, like, I look, and there were good things that the military gave me. Discipline, being one of the biggest, right? I think before I joined the military, I bounced around from job to job. I was limited in my mind of what I was capable of. And one of the things the military showed me, mainly because I didn't have a choice, I had to do the things they told me to do, is that when I thought I couldn't do anymore, I found out that it's our mind that, that limits us more than anything. So there are some really great things in the military that I think are there for people. And, but I do caution people, just know that what you are, it kind of like that informed consent thing, right? Some people, maybe college is not for them, and maybe the military is an option for them to be able to get a career. It was for me. But know that what you're knowing what you're getting yourself into, and just understanding, that you are putting yourself in a very different position than what the average civilian is ever going to experience. And I think is critically important. And so I would just encourage anybody watching the show. It's not that the military is something that you shouldn't do, but just know what you're getting yourself into. Be aware that it is a sacrifice. There's no doubt about it. You lose options, you lose choices when you go in. They could separate you from your family, and there's nothing you can do or say about it. That's just the way it is. It was for me. First 2 years I was in, I saw my wife for 4 months. So, there's we have some challenges, and I think we are beginning to see some, like you said, some positive changes, at least in terms of DEI. I think we got a long ways to go when it comes to transparency, especially in regards to what happened with COVID. And I personally will never be satisfied until I see COVID completely off the shelves. I think it's unsafe. If they want to have it out there for older people who, weighing the risks, maybe it's a 50-50 chance for them. But I'll tell you this much. I've had COVID at least 4 times, never been vaccinated, but I've had it 4 times. I've gotten over it every single time. And in fact, this last time that I had it, which was 2 weeks ago, I had, I didn't even have any ivermectin. So I had like 2 tablets of it, and that was it, because I had given it out to family members and stuff and hadn't restocked. And I forgot about something that our grandparents used to know about. And my wife pulled it out of the cupboard, and it was a bag full of dried mullein leaves. And mullein is it's like an herb that just grows on the side of the road. Looks like, it's got like this big green fuzzy, leaves, and a big long, kind of stamen in the center with like these yellow flowers on it. And it is just this, ugly weed that everybody sees. I mean, literally it grows in the places where, where car smog is and all of that. So like usually the exits of freeways or on-ramps. And that stuff was so powerful and effective. Like there was a point where I think on day 2, I was coughing so hard and so much that I actually got scared. I thought, crap, this could kill me, because I'm having a hard time breathing. And the problem is that our medicine today still doesn't acknowledge, the realities of all this. They're still pushing the vaccine. And I did not want to go to the doctors. I certainly didn't want to go to the VA because the VA is still pushing this crap.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to the doctor. I'll just sit here, and if I die, I die. I mean, that's a sad place to be when you don't trust the medical industry. But my wife pulled this stuff out of the cupboard. She goes, you know, hey, maybe this would help you. And I go, oh, you know what? I totally forgot about that. I said, yeah, why don't you make some of it? It's a bronchial dilator. It's a expectorant. It basically thins out mucus and all of that.
Yeah.
So she made that for me and just put some honey in it, and it tastes good. I drank it immediately. The cough stopped.
Wow.
You know, about 3-4 hours later, I started coughing again. She made me another batch. I drank it. Cough stopped. That stuff was amazing. And within 2 days, I was back on my feet feeling great.
Wow.
So, you know, I'm just saying, like, you know, God's made, you know, even for man-made diseases like COVID, which it is certainly a man-made disease, ultimately all the bits and pieces and parts, right, are still from nature. And nature has ways of solving these problems. I mean, that's, you know, God made this amazing, you know, planet where we're living next to all these plants that are basically being bombarded with all the same crap we're being hit with, except the difference between them and us is they're little chemical factories that have, you know, adapted to create, you know, these treatments that basically fight against these things. So it's pretty amazing. And, you know, so I do say that we got to understand and we got to know and realize that no matter what we do in life, there's always a cost, and there's always going to be, you know, don't ever go into something just thinking everything's going to be great and honky dory. And, you know, and you know, I think that's the one piece of advice I would have for anybody joining the military is just realize there's a cost. There's a reason why veterans get honored on Veterans Day. There's a reason why, you know, they have, you know, the VA loan and other, you know, incentives and GI Bill, because you're not getting that for free. It comes at a cost, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. You're right. Yeah. Well, I would say the same thing, just to kind of complete that thought there. So what I would say is, if you really want to go in the military and that is something that you kind of have your heart set on doing, then what I would say is know what your red lines are, you know, and just know that, hey, if you, yes, in the military, yes, you have to follow orders. You have to follow orders that you don't like. Yes, you have to follow orders that you may even think are unsound. However, that all changes when we're talking about orders that are unlawful, you know, and
That's
so
right.
just understand that going ahead of time, understand what your red lines are, and just make the decision ahead of time that if I am ever faced with this, then the decision that I am going to make is this, and just have that clear going in.
That's the righteous approach to it, folks. Look, it's no different than when I blew the whistle. I would, you know, I get people all the time reaching out to me because they know of me as a whistleblower. They know that I survived blowing the whistle, you know, in a very politically charged environment.
Sure.
And I get people that reach out to me and they're like, you know, Nate, you know, I've got this situation, and they, you know, they confide in me and they're like, you know, should I blow the whistle? And, you know, my answer is it's not always yes. My answer is, look, if you believe that this is what you're supposed to do because your conscience is telling you need to do this, then you need to do it. But don't be fooled into thinking that, you know, it's going to be all glory and, you know, and good things are going to come. Nothing good may come of it. In fact, you may do nothing but suffer, and you may, and the likelihood, I would say, is that you will not see anything good from it. I would say the likelihood is that there will be no justice. You will be punished for doing the right thing. And that's life. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But you will at least have the good conscience of knowing you did the right thing. And someday when you stand before your maker, that's when you'll see the praise for what you did. And that is what I've had to accept in my life from my experience of whistleblowing. It totally destroyed my career. I basically had to start over. And I hate to say this, but you know, it's like once you go down the road of blowing the whistle, it's kind of in you. And so, you know, I've had numerous occasions of where I've either stepped away from a job or I have blown the whistle and ruined my prospects of, you know, advancing. I've had numerous instances like that because it's just who I am. But I also recognize that someday I'm going to stand before my maker, and I'm ultimately going to be held accountable, not only for the things that I did that were wrong, but also for the good that I chose not to do in order to benefit myself.
Sure.
And I think that's where, even in the military, folks, you know, if you join the military, you gotta understand, you may be able in a court of law be able to stand on the witness stand and say, hey, I did this because I was following orders. And you may be able to get off scot-free in the eyes of the law for that. But ultimately, you're going to be held accountable to a higher authority after this life. And when you know that something is wrong and you're conscious and the Holy Spirit is telling you this is wrong, you need to say something, you need to do something, you need to resist this. You've got to do that. Otherwise, you're going to suffer later. Mm-hmm. So it's the way I look at it, it's like it's either suffer now or suffer later. Sure, I would rather suffer now.
Yeah. Very, very well stated. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brad, what are your plans now? And, you know, kind of what are you doing now, and what is your focus, and you know, where can people follow you and be involved in what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, in addition to just my day job to try and pay the bills, you know, I just continue largely doing what you're doing and just trying to hold myself accountable, hold others accountable, you know, align with truth, and try and get people to realize that, hey, government overreach is unacceptable, and that we as citizens of a republic, we have a large responsibility on our own shoulders to make sure that our leaders and representatives abide by the rule of law. You know, being a citizen of a republic is not easy. You can't do it from the couch. You know, you got to be engaged. You got to be active. And so I just try to make sure, as I'm reminding myself of that, you know, encourage others to do the same thing. So I am quite active, I would say, on both X and on Substack. So people can find me on X at just my name. So at Brad Miller 1010. And on Substack at bradmiller10.substack.com. And I'm fairly active on both. I do try to share a lot of my thoughts and write some things on Substack as well that I put out for other people who might be interested.
Awesome. Well, folks, I would encourage you to go out and follow Brad and check out and subscribe to his Substack. You're going to get truthful and honest discussion about a lot of these issues. And, you know, sometimes the truth isn't easy to hear. You know, it's sometimes it's tough because you know, especially, you know, when you've got to deal with and face these complex issues that aren't just simple, but, you know, you have to speak for what is truthful and what is right and stand up against, you know, what's wrong. And that's not always easy to do. But if you follow guys like Brad, you're going to find it easier to do because you're going to have in your tool belt the right arguments and the right understanding of things. And so, Brad, I appreciate you being on the show today. I hope that you'll come on again. I definitely want to have you on again to talk about some other topics.
Sure.
You know, some military, you know, some of the things that are going on right now in the world, and just to get your, you know, your armchair, you know, opinion on, you know, some of the, you know, some of the, I guess, you know, changes in the Department of War, and, you know, in our strategic, you know, planning and things like that. I'd love to get your insights on that, you know, as a former lieutenant commander or lieutenant colonel. I think there's probably a lot there that you see and have some opinions of, but you probably, you know, don't always share. But I'd love to, you know, to pick your brain about some of that.
Sure. Okay. Sounds
well,
great.
Hey, folks, thank you so much for joining the show today. This has been a pre-record. So for those of you that are following, I appreciate you guys in the comments section, but make sure and like and subscribe the show. I did have to record because of another commitment this evening. So, but I want to thank all of you for joining the show today. God bless you, and keep driving on and doing the right thing. And don't be afraid. Brad, last thing I'd like to ask you, because I always like to ask this of my guests before we end the show. You know, we talked about a lot of different things. If you were to kind of like narrow things down to the most important thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, you know, we've been talking for about an hour and we've gone, you know, into a lot of subjects, but what is the key thing you want people to take away from our conversation?
Yeah, I would say alignment with truth. I think if that's kind of if the truth is your pole star, the heading that you always keep yourself engaged upon, or that's the trajectory that you follow, then I think you can't go wrong, because that's going to lead you to God, but it's also going to lead you to all the things that will keep you in line where you should go. And this kind of goes right back there in line with what you were saying as we were kind of closing out, that, hey, that doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. And in fact, sometimes aligning with truth means that it's going to be very hard, but sometimes that's just it's what we sometimes have to do, not just as humans, but also just as Americans, as citizens of this country too. I mean, I do think that we're in a rough time right now in our country, and it's going to require people to say, I'm going to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, or I'm going to choose to look at this. I'm going to choose to accept the uncomfortable truth rather than the comfortable lie.
Yeah. Denial is a very, it's an easy thing for any of us to do, because it's almost a protection mechanism, right?
Sure.
And, but yeah, you're right. If we want to be effective in this world, we've got to strive for the truth, even if it means it's going to be painful.
Sure.
So Brad, I always end up closing our show out in prayer, because I believe that, look, we've got a lot we've got to do, but ultimately, a lot of what we experience in this world is in God's hands. Would you mind closing us out?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Our Father, we come before you here in prayer and in supplication for not just ourselves, but also for our country and for many of the other believers who feel aligned with truth, who want to do what's right and what's proper in your eyes. And we ask your blessings upon us, upon our country, upon those who are trying to do the right thing, those who sometimes stumble, but those who want to remain on the path. We ask that our humble efforts to remain strong might be aided by your hand. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Guys, stay vigilant, stay true. Do not bend. That's really what it boils down to, is you got to be willing to stand up, and even if it means you're going to end up being broken, because like I said, we're all going to be held accountable at some point with our Maker. So folks, stay honest, stay godly, keep heading down the right path. With that, God bless and good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change. Time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.